Even after 19 years from its release, Resident Evil 4 is a game that's still talked about, referenced, analyzed by layman gamers to people who analyze video games for a living. It's been released and re-released in many different platforms and consoles, as well as a VR game, and recently even saw itself becoming a remake.
Ooh, I know one. Resident Evil 4. 4.
Why is that? I mean, I absolutely love this game and all, but I'm sure that there are better games out there, right? Even though RE4 is well worshipped, everyone seems to unanimously agree that its narrative is simply stupid.
No thanks, bro.
And that the writing itself seems dated. Why then has Resident Evil 4 amassed such a huge reputation, and why is it still not dead? Well, whatever follows in this video is my humble attempt at answering that very question from a historical and philosophical perspective, with indulgent yet hopefully edifying detours to other corners of media. So, where do we start? Well, we'll start right where the game does. The beginning sequence of Resident Evil 4 is not at all slow to tell you what it is going to be. Leon, sitting gloomily by the car window as the police officers accompanying him tease him dryly, with Leon effortlessly poking back without losing the cool composure, sets up many things off the bat. 1. Leon's all grown up. He's no longer the rookie cop we saw back in Raccoon City. Speaking of which, 2. It is no longer the Japanese man's conception of late 90s America, Raccoon City, that we have been inhabiting through 3 different characters over the course of 2 different games anymore. We are somewhere else, somewhere new, somewhere foreign, as we can infer from the police officers' accents and by the fact that they're guiding Leon as though a tourist. Furthermore, the game is surprisingly quick to let you into the action. This isn't something new for Resident Evil games, but still, it adds to the primacy of player input for the game. A fact that is of utmost importance for horror games, but especially so here, as we will see soon enough. Resident Evil 4 is basically split into 3 broad parts: the village, the castle, and the island, each of which having their own subtle mood and undertone. One way each of these locations are made distinct and varied in tone is through the aesthetics. The village part of the game takes place with daylight, shrouding most of the time spent within the village with a dusty and grimy brown color scheme. The village is sort of a transition stage, really, which may be a little weird to say seeing as it is the first part of the game. The reason why is that it acts as a transition from Resident Evil as a horror-focused franchise to a more action-focused one. The village is the true display of the particular brand of horror, or rather dread, that the game is aiming to depict. And it starts the very moment we get to control Leon. Leon occupies a comfortable 35% or so of the screen, always to the left. The camera is almost latched onto his back. He is a mountain, if you will, that we use to engage with the world. And as he approaches the house, the very first new thing that Resident Evil 4 brings to us is swiftly realized. The man inside grunts angrily at Leon in a language that's strictly not English.
¿Qué carajo estás haciendo aquí? ¡Lárgate, cabrón!
Sorry to have bothered you.
He then suddenly grabs his axe and lunges at us with an attack. We are to kill him swiftly, upon doing which we are given a prompt to press X to inspect. He's not a zombie. This is probably the biggest exclamation point moment in the game for me. This is the big new thing. Resident Evil is no longer about the silly Umbrella Corporation and mindless moaning zombies of the games thus far. And this differentiating of itself from the zombie-filled narratives of its predecessors comes in 2 more aspects. Firstly, the villager's speech is not English. He speaks Spanish. Yes, but again, as the producer Hiroyuki Kobayashi stated in an interview, yeah, they're saying actual intelligible words. The protagonist Leon doesn't understand Spanish though, so he's basically in the same position as the player. The game is supposed to take place in some part of Europe. Although we could infer it takes place in Spain, Kobayashi has directly stated that it does not take place in Spain. RE4's location, rather than being an imitation of a real place, is rather an idea of a place, an idea of a cultic village in the middle of somewhere you are foreign to, somewhere you are strictly unwelcome. And this is the same philosophy behind the language. The Spanish spoken by the villagers and the cultists aren't supposed to be understood, even if you happen to understand Spanish. Playing through the game, the immediate thing that stuck out to me as something of a connoisseur of horror media myself is that the sinisterish and rough phrases used by the villagers and the cultists seem to really freak me out. There is something about them using actual tangible language, presumably in an offensive way to you, that really got to me. Their speech is specifically intended to evoke a sense of confusion and unwelcomeness. They're not repeating moans or unintelligible throat noises like the zombies of the eras bygone. They're specifically communicating, and it is made glaringly obvious that you are not meant to understand it. They're tangible enough to make you understand that they are communicating, but foreign enough to tickle the confusion part of your brain. Secondly, it is the fact of their speed. The Ganados are human in their physical abilities. They're strictly not zombies as exclaimed by the game itself, and thus they don't move using the worn and undead bodies of zombies. Instead, they are very alive and bodily capable. Unlike the zombies of the past generations, the Ganados have actual AI that doesn't just mindlessly go for you straight up, but try to duck or dodge bullets and even try to go around you to catch you off guard. Coming from those said past generations, this is something unsettlingly new. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, the Ganados don't differ from the zombies by that wide of a margin, and yet it is the subtle difference of them being able-bodied, intelligent beings more capable than zombies that yet again adds to the eerie foreignness of the game. Like the location of the game itself, even in a meta sense, Resident Evil 4 is just new enough, just different enough to elicit familiarity and simultaneously an aspect of dread and apprehension, as it is not quite the same. This feeling, of course, is a very documented and discussed one. Hell, even Freud found it so interesting that he kept coming back to it to the point that it has become a very accepted member of the psychoanalytic school. It is the unheimlich, the uncanny. Something that is familiar and yet not really. Something that shouldn't be there, but is. This uncanniness works in two layers in Resident Evil 4. One, in the aforementioned meta layer, in that it is the zombie shooting game franchise and the zombie shooting man taking on something very zombie-like, but not quite. The Ganados are like zombies, but not quite. They act and move like them, but again, not exactly. And for the second layer, the uncanniness can be found in the very core of Resident Evil 4's brand of horror, or to be more accurate, its brand of conflict. And that's the horror of the hordes. After killing the guy and Hollywooding out the window, the first real taste of combat is presented before the player. 3 or so more of the Ganados attack as Leon is practically cornered. Of course, it is very unlikely anyone ever really dies here, but the point is the suddenness and the rawness of the attack itself. As it seems to always come up whenever discussing the game, Leon cannot move when he's using a weapon. The only real movement afforded to you while you have the gun ready to shoot with the right trigger pressed down is that which is provided to aim. Leon turns slowly as well, while the Ganados, almost always in groups of more than 2, do not relent. Due to this, every attack or ambush by them always builds anxiety in the player just because of how inevitable the odds may seem. Leon is just one and is rusty, while they are many and they are not stopping unless you make them. Furthermore, in this game, Leon feels rather fragile. This is added to by how encountering the chainsaw wielders is basically a one-way ticket to a gruesome mutilation animation. The sheer gore in Leon's head popping off is enough to cement this feeling of fragility to Leon. He cannot just stand there and tank attacks. He cannot let the horde enrapture him. And then there's the question of supplies. Again, Resident Evil 4 marks the end of Resident Evil as a survival horror franchise. But yet still, even though you're granted extravagant weapons and ammunition, even for the first time playthrough, the mere fact of limitedness of ammo is added with the aforementioned suddenness of the Ganados' attack to create an underlying layer of anxiety. You most likely won't really run out of ammo in the early game, and even by the time I ran out of ammo during the late game, I still had options which let me press onwards just enough to let the game give me ammunition. Regardless, that almost doesn't really matter. Again, Leon is just weak enough to make the horde seem potently threatening. Then there is the very fact of the Ganados being a cult. Well, that's not exactly true, as the cult is actually called Los Iluminados, and the Ganados themselves aren't exactly human, but the vessels of Las Plagas, a parasitic virus that grows inside of them and later on even pops out of their heads. Yet still, it wouldn't be wrong to say that the horror presented in Resident Evil is that of the cult. Cult horror is a side of horror in media that we see recur every so often. From the late 60s film Rosemary's Baby to the cult classic 2019 Ari Aster flick Midsommar to an indie horror comedy RPG maker game by the name Felvidek that came out this year, cults have pervaded the sphere of entertainment media for as long as they have been around. A part of the reason why involves, of course, a morbid fascination with their real-life counterparts, from the Church of Scientology to the much more notorious Manson family to the infamous Japanese cult by the name of Aum Shinrikyo, responsible for the Tokyo sarin gas attack. These groups are known for their despicable actions ranging from simple swindling to torture, murder, and every other kind of horrible stuff you can think of. A big part of this fascination is the aspect of the seeming obviousness of their evil. Of course they're a goddamn cult. They ritualistically drink blood, goddammit. What do you mean? In hindsight, it all seems obvious. A charismatic leader at the top of a pyramid-like structure of organization who is either directly worshipped or claims to be a prophet, making people pray, repent, or do other ritualistic and religious activities, and also usually extracting monetary gain from them. And in this obviousness, it is easy to brand the cultists as these are people who aren't strong enough to stand on their own, so they flock towards groups and end up in these cults. Of course, if you have read up on cults, you know that that's not only an audacious view of looking at it, but also a wrong one. The people who turn to cults are rarely people who are economically and socially secure and privileged. They're not people who have a strong community that supports them to lay back on when shit hits the fan. But also, that claim is a rather one-sided one as well. The 1973 film The Wicker Man is a film that I adore from the moment I finished it. It's by no means a perfect film, far from it. It's old, and even for that era, it was awkward. Regardless, it is a film to be remembered and even revered. Unfortunately, I wasn't the only one who thought that, and they remade it into the notorious Nick Cage version that I do not intend to talk about any further. The original follows Sergeant Howie, a devout Catholic man, as he makes his way through a little secluded island by the name of Summer Isle, looking for a missing girl. As he ventures into the depths of the culture of the people of Summer Isle, he discovers great cause for concern. See, they seem to not practice the state religion Christianity, but rather a form of Celtic paganism that Howie finds deeply disturbing. Now, spoilers, but one thing leads to another, and at the end, we have Howie locked up inside a giant Wicker Man structure as the people of Summer Isle set fire to it. You see, they have lured him in order to offer him as a sacrifice for their gods to grant them a better yield next year. The ending moments of the film are those worth having eyes and ears for. As the Wicker Man burns with Howie inside it, he calls for his God. He prays to Jesus and desperately addresses God, all while the residents of Summerisle perform a religious dance and sing for the sacred sun god to give them better crop yield. It is breathtaking as both the parties plead to their own gods only for the camera to set its sights on the uncaring sun setting. Jesus does not step down from Haven to help Howie, nor does the sun god appear to show appreciation to the pagans. The film is resolute and sure in what it wants to say, especially at a time when religious promiscuity was seen much as a serious sin by the public. The Catholic public is just as wrong and clueless in their beliefs as the cultists are. The Wicker Man strictly questions this one-sided, they're wrong because they're stupid and fall into such obvious traps, in a way that's much more dramatic and yet real, in that it turns their very judgmental glances towards themselves. But one could argue that it doesn't hold up much in an increasingly atheistic world, and you would not be completely wrong. However, as the recent cult film Midsommar argues, it still very much applies to us. Why is it Midsommar and not Midsommar? I first read it as Midsommar or Midsommar or something. That's way more cooler. Like, Midsommar sounds jagged and like pointy, but Midsommar sounds like wine, like curved wine. Does that make sense? Midsommar takes an empathetic, or at least a seeming empathetic view of its cult, a Swedish commune by the name Horde. We follow Danny, a college student who's recently lost both her parents and sibling to suicide, as she accompanies her asshole boyfriend and his friends into the commune and slowly but surely gets indoctrinated into it. At a first watch, the film may seem a little too pessimistic and empathetic towards its depiction of the Harga. They are happy and energetic. They're a strong community that supports every single member of it, and also follow rather progressive ideals when it comes to work. And they also seem to provide the main character with much needed familial support that she's lacking from her boyfriend. The iconic final scene of Danny smiling as her companions along with her boyfriend are being burned inside a religious structure. She's become happy, finally overcoming grief and finding family and belongingness in the Harga. It would seem that the Harga may not be that bad of a people after all, not compared to the grim and suffocating people of modernity. No, these vibrant and bright individuals aren't bad at all. But somewhat ironically, this is the true genius of the film. Its ability to open you up to the prospects of a cult being not so bad. The Harga are terrible people. Danny joining the commune is not an ambivalent fact, but a deeply sad one, in that this is what a community-deprived modern soul falls to if circumstances seem to align. Midsommar is the definitive proof that if you were in her position, you would have done the very same. Because you do the same. The public consensus for the Harga on YouTube is surprisingly positive. Surprising because cults are never portrayed with good faith in the media, and by extension, never received as such. I mean, how can they? After the Enlightenment and the death of God, reason and individuality is the essence of mankind. Or so it seemed. The ability to think and be a Sherlockian master of deductions and theory, while not siding with any lowly crowds and losing your individuality, is honorable and noble. After Fukuyama's book, End of History, written as a reaction to the end of the Cold War and the fall of communism, we had accepted the fact of liberal capitalism. It's the end, you see. The ultimate form of social and economic organization that allowed humanity to flourish. This is our ultimate form. And as such, the theory of liberalism, the predominance of the individual, is the accepted truth. Your individuality is what makes you you. Lose it, and you are a pathetic, subhuman monster. Sounding familiar? After leaving the hut, Leon makes his way into the main area of the village itself. On your way, you are stalked by the villagers, sometimes apprehended too. This builds a sense of dread. Why are these intelligent humans coordinating themselves and laying traps to capture you? Once Leon enters the village, one of the iconic moments in gaming history ensues. The entire village, sprawling with the Ganados, all take aggression to you, making their way over to kill you. This sequence is exhilarating. There seems to be no end to them. No matter how many people you kill, they seem to not stop pouring in until you've eventually ran out of ammunition that you've gathered by desperately grasping whatever you can for herbs and bullets. You may think to make your way into one of the houses, which may lend you a few seconds of respite. But fear not. The Ganados gradually will start making their way via windows and ladders, and even the main door itself. It is as if you're thrown into the middle of the sea, made to deal with the unending and ever ferocious tidal waves that the sea has to offer. The first time I played this part, I was at the very edge of my seat, clinging to my controller like my life depended on it. It's probably the horror moment in the game, perhaps the last real one for the next couple of Resident Evil games. Yes, there are certain other moments in RE4 that's tense and frightening, like the time you first encounter the Regenerator, but this is the moment that really exercises the overall motif of the game. The sequence ends with the bell from the church tolling, leading to all the Ganados dropping their weapons and stumbling towards the church en masse. This is, again, a very uncanny moment. These people would stop at nothing to have Leon killed, and yet they just stop and stroll right past him? For what? A bingo? It not only establishes the uncanny of the Ganados, but also the mystery of whom the bell was rung by. We find out through separate ways, the game's additional content, that it was Ada Step-on-Me Wong who rang the bell. Ada Step-on-Me Wong. I did not write that. I'm someone who is only explicitly revealed to be in the game only later on. This sequence, though, the slowly enveloping wave that's dead set on consuming Leon, may seem to conflict with the aggression shown by the villagers in the opening, at least in a philosophical sense. As I said, you are meant to feel unwelcome and foreign, and yet why do they try to consume you rather than to push you away? In other words, why do they want you to be one with them? Well, that's because the only thing about Leon that's truly unwelcome to the Ganados is his individuality. He's the all-capable American superstar, a paragon of individuality. He must be assimilated, for he negates the very core of cults. Hence why the player interactivity is such an important part in the game. You, the player, are the individuality present in Leon. You are the real threat. This is why the game divulges from just a rescue plot to a rescue and a cure plot. The big cheese of the village, Chief Mendez, captures you and injects the parasite into your neck. The rest of the game, thus, takes place in a narrative clock, as you are to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley, and cure both her and yourself before you turn into one of them. This plot point is essential to the core of the narrative because it too dwells within the realm of the fear involved in losing one's individuality. Cult horror has a lot of parallels to zombies in that they possess an air of the uncanny. The members of cults are portrayed as humans with something wrong with them. They're like you and me, except they believe in something that is simply not like us. They may believe in justified murder or torture that the rest of society does not. Furthermore, they lack individuality, and thus, like how the fear of zombies comes from the fear of turning into one of them through their bite, the fear of cults, too, is the fear of becoming one of them. Fukuyama was wrong, as it would be made clear with the September 11 attack on the World Trade Center and the following war on terror. If this was it, if modern liberal capitalism was the end of history, why did the atrocities to follow happen? Why are cults forming and gaining power despite the fact of the complete liberation of the individual from the grasp of the collective with the fall of communism? It almost seems like we crave community, and when modern life flings us into despair, we desperately cling to whatever may provide it, even if it is a monstrous cult. This sudden kick to the nuts of liberal society is the dread and anxiety portrayed in Resident Evil 4. It's the real horror of cults. They prey on an old and essential aspect of you and take advantage of it. It's the dread of the fact that maybe they will assimilate you into their own as you lose your individuality, the most important thing to survive ideologically in the modern day. These uncanny humans will envelop you. The villains of RE4 are all the epitome of this man who has given himself up to the cult. The Big Cheese, Salazar, and Sadler's monster forms have their bodies as only a small, insignificant part of the entirety of the beast, with Sadler's final form not even resembling a human. These are cautionary tales for the modern individual, a physical representation of what not to become. In fact, the loss of control over circumstances surrounding oneself is another motif throughout the game. For one thing, we have Ashley, who, although can be hidden in garbage containers, is mostly uncontrollable by the player. Of course, ignoring the exception of when we are made to play as her for a tiny section of the game. Ashley is the part of the game that everyone who's ever played it would mostly agree is incredibly annoying. If you don't constantly position yourself in a way that the horde cannot get to yourself and Ashley, she'll invariably be taken by one of the hordes. And this only adds to the sheer anxiety that the game builds up, as you have to take care of your own rather fragile self and keep how many ammunition and healing items you have in mind, while controlling the horde and trying to shoot down the enemy who took Ashley, and of course if you miss by chance and hit her, it's an instant game over. And again, let me remind you, this game is about the horde. And so there are many moments in the game where the Ganados or the cultists keep flowing in. This is the main gameplay loop, after all. Control, both that over one's individuality and the situation one finds oneself in, is the crucial component in making Resident Evil 4 as intense and masterful as it is. Putting this fact in its proper historical context, it makes a lot of sense. It was a post-9/11 world that has seen and will continue to see the diminishing of that very thing. Control over many, many different areas of society. In fact, this is probably why 18 years after the release, we remake the game while keeping the core aspects mostly intact. Because we are indeed still in that post-9/11 era, still too stubborn to accept that history finds its way, even if the individual may proclaim its death. That's right, the real horror of Resident Evil 4 is not the cult of the monsters, it's history. Resident Evil 4 depicts the fears and anxieties of a person living in the post-2000s era. It was and still is considered one of the best games of all time, partly because of this reason. Resident Evil 4 is a story about the superiority of the individual over the mindless collective, told in a time and a world where the opposite was revealing itself to be painfully true. And thus we have the shift of Resident Evil from horror, a genre that depends upon one's vulnerability, to action, a genre that rewards one with invulnerability. Just like how Tokuro Fujiwara hired Shinji Mikami to lead the development of the original Resident Evil because Mikami genuinely hated getting scared, and Fujiwara realized that only people who can get scared can really make games that are actually scary. The uncanniness and the dread that seeps through, even after all these years, is a direct result of that very desperation in the attempt to hold on to the individualist ideal that was and is slipping away from our grasps, as if it never even existed. But of course, Resident Evil 4 is one of the best games I've ever played, a genuine 9 out of 10. Go play it. Oh, it's kind of awkward turning this into a review when it's clearly not, but go ahead, play it anyways. Well, that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe and like and all that jazz if you want to see more from me. I like to make videos about anime, video games, overly indulgent, emotional, and philosophical stuff, ruminating media or whatever. I have a Patreon where I plan to do stuff with it. I'll put your name here during the outros as a thanks. That's something you pay for, actually, yeah. And also other stuff, other very, very fun and interesting stuff. Yes, Patreon, and subscribe and like. Comment, follow me on Twitter. That's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.